So we've talked quite a lot about a few sectors, but I think it's quite interesting to look across the sectors within the built environment. So I wonder whether we could do a sort of a spot ranking or a top performer and sort of the good boys and girls and the naughty boys and girls. Which sectors do we feel are kind of leading the charge in terms of retrofit, and which ones are struggling and need more support?
Do you want to jump in? Or?
Well, I think, my work last year focused on retrofitting offices, and we focused first on offices when we were looking at non-domestic buildings because there's a lot more clarity on, how to retrofit offices, and they are leaders in this space, one of the leaders in this space, not the only. But yeah, so I think there's a lot greater understanding of what kind of targets officers can achieve and how best to do that. I understand that there's been a lot of progress around higher education buildings in particular, because they're generally leaders in kind of understanding their own data and wanting to be innovators in this space, but also have a lot more ownership and understanding of their own buildings, so that they're working on their own assets and they have a long-term interest in their own assets, I think.
Yeah, I think offices are obviously probably further ahead than anyone else. I think we've seen quite a shift in student accommodation. So, privately built student accommodation providers of that definitely engaged with it and doing quite well. There's already certain providers are already decarbonising, partly driven by students. So it's actually a consideration of the students as they're coming through and selecting their accommodation. I know, industrial and retail are making a push. I think it's that tenant divide that's the struggle for them at the moment, and control over what the tenants actually do. And I guess the other big one that's is been growing in London but still needs a lot of work is hospitality, so hotels, accommodation, where again for them the driver is the customer experience. So when customers start sort of expressing and sort of voting with their wallet as to where they stay, then it won't change as quickly. And whilst the asset itself, like the individual building, is important for hotels, it is driven by the people in there and their expectations and how they use it. So I think,
and they are generally high users of energy.
Lots of hot water. EUI. People go for a break, and it is a case of it's like new bed linen, new towels every day.
I guess there's a we've talked a lot about policy, and we talked about kind of the financial markets and drivers like that. I mean, something that we talk a bit within Cundall, we refer to our client's client, and I suppose that's exactly what you're talking about, is how much does it matter to the users of the building, whoever they are, depending on the sector. So I think that's quite an important element of it, isn't it? Students have one view, but at the moment, hotel users who are our client's client, they're not a big push for it.
No, I think for the operators are concerned about the user experience. So it's how their clients come in, experience it, and making sure that there's no negative sort of opinions, thoughts, and experiences for them. And so they want their hot water on tap, within seconds rather than minutes. And it is a case that's going to be their key consideration. They are doing quite a lot of work around their scope 3 emissions, the upstream and the downstream, that they can control. But ultimately, until the clients or their clients, our clients,
guests,
start to really force the issue, then I think it will always be a struggle. I mean, again,
I think it does go back to the raising awareness piece, though, as well. It's because when I've stayed in a hotel, I have no idea what energy consumption there is, absolutely none. And, it takes a while to even work out how to use the heating and cooling and get that right. So, and I think that's a key barrier to actually, being able to drive that in the first place. What was part of our work on retrofit is understanding that, there's 3 parts to this, to retrofit. It's the physical building, it's the technological systems, but it's also the occupants, it's also the people that are actually using the buildings. They're the ones that use the energy in the first place, not the buildings themselves. And that goes back to the whole optimization piece, where we found that just kind of understanding how to use the building more effectively can result in, you know, huge savings, like 25%, 30% of energy consumption just by using it more effectively. And I think that's where innovation really comes in, is to using different software platforms, different interfaces, different platforms that kind of help the occupants and the users and the clients' clients understand what they're actually doing when they press a button. Otherwise, you know, it's not visible at all. So I think closing that little feedback loop could make a big difference.
I think just picking up on that and tying it back into like the skills deficit that we have. I mean, facilities management and operation of buildings is, you know, we see such variability in terms of, you know, well-managed assets to ones you go to that, quite frankly, they don't know where the control sort of head end is. They're not worried about making sure that asset is performing efficiently. There's a number of horror stories around, you know, buildings that are using the same amount of energy out of hours as they are in the operational hours, and
it's a lot more common than anybody realises because it's invisible.
Nobody knows it's happening. And I think there's the fact that we need to, you know, ultimately building operators need to be willing to pay for the skill set in the facilities management side to actually manage buildings effectively. And you know, we are designing more and more complicated buildings in terms of, you know, the infrastructure that goes into them, the number of systems, the interconnectedness of them. And actually, you know, it is difficult to understand necessarily, you know, how it was, you know, designed, put together to be operated easily. So actually upskilling and actually paying for that I don't think it's going to be a case of the lowest common, you know, the lowest cost facilities management approach. It needs to be more of a, you know, an incentive for facilities management to be able to drive the efficiency. So they need to be incentivised in that. We need to upskill what they provide.
It's a fascinating area. I mean, it's the equivalent of just accidentally leaving your car running every night when you get home, kind of thing, isn't it? It's sort of, it seems like a crazy thing, but it's a building, and so people allow it to happen.
I think I did once say it's the equivalent of, you know, designing a Rolls Royce and then taking it to Quick Fit to get it serviced. So, it you know, it is making sure that we have got the skills in the industry to deliver it and the focus on it.
Yeah. So, what do you feel are the biggest myths and misconceptions around retrofit that you find in your day-to-day lives?
I guess the first one is, you know, it's expensive and doesn't pay back. I think, you know, the value proposition is there. Even, you know, optimizing buildings is, you know, doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It can be simple measures. You know, some of it just engaging with tenants. It is relatively low cost, but can drive massive savings just by, you know, looking at set points and, you know, simple things that aren't a great intervention. And I guess the other bit is, this is more on the residential side that you see this, but the fact that, you know, heat pumps don't work because of the age of the building. And it's a case of, well, they can do, they just need to be designed and sized correctly. It's just because you haven't got you know, you can't insulate your walls because you're in a conservation area or whatever it might be. The system, you can still have a heat pump, and it will still work. And I guess alongside that is the heat pumps being a new technology. I think they're a tried and tested method, sort of technology that's been around for 100 odd years. So we know how heat pumps operate. It's not new. It's a very tried, tested piece of kit. All we've got now is, you know, new ways to adopt it into a building. So everyone's got a heat pump in their house, in their fridge. It's just on a bigger scale.
Very interesting. Anna?
I think I would echo the cost point and the concerns around payback, you know, particularly optimization and light retrofit. That's been shown to have a very, very quick payback time, you know, 2 to 3 years, even less when you're just talking about optimization. But then kind of seeing it as an extra cost, an additional cost, an added, kind of extra over, where, you know, if you think about retrofitting buildings strategically over the long term, and make sure that it's kind of built into your standard repair and maintenance schedules and kind of aligned with trigger points like lease events and times when you have vacant occupation or vacant possession of one floor, for example, then it could be seen as we're actually just iteratively improving our buildings for the future. We're conserving their value. We're protecting them from future risks, both in terms of the transition risk towards net zero, so ensuring that they're performing as efficiently as possible, but also kind of the physical risks, which we spoke about earlier as well, and the market risks. So ensuring that they're aligned with future market direction, so what people are actually wanting and looking for in the future, and what people look for and what people need. So if you think about it as an investment in the future of your buildings, your assets, investment in future value, then it becomes quite a different proposition. So it's not just an added cost.
Very interesting. We talked a little bit about climate resilience earlier. I guess I want to end on a positive note, so we'll come back onto the positive in a bit, but just to talk about the risk side of things before we start to wrap up. I think it is really important for us to understand the downside, the do nothing option, both in terms of what you were just talking about, the risk to the buildings and the value in that building, but also along the climate change scenarios that we're looking at. So we talked about the climate resilience and what that means for buildings, but is there more that we go into with that, with why climate resilience is so important? Where we go with buildings on the downside of it.
I guess, we've seen, another, what is likely to be another record sort of warm year for the globe this year. It doesn't seem to be getting any better very quickly. And if you think the trajectories we're on, when you start looking globally around, actually there's a lot of development being done in, developing nations of the world. Actually, it's not the rosiest picture at the moment. So I think, there's sometimes an idea to try and things have got to be perfect for us to actually implement them. And I think sometimes you just need to actually go, right, it's not perfect, but don't let that be the enemy of actually doing something good. So I think, we talk about the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action. So, if you look along, the next 5-10 years, ultimately, if everyone went out there, spent their money on or invested it rather than spending it, invested it in driving efficiency, reducing energy consumption, then actually it will see the payback in the long run. It's just having the framework and the sort of metrics for them to use to consider that. But I think both a slightly pessimistic view of we've still got a very long way to go, but the upside is we've got so much we can do and actually try and move things forward.
Retrofitting buildings is about future-proofing on so many different levels as well. It's one action that everyone can take is to understand how their building works and plan out how they're going to retrofit it in the future to mitigate these risks. Because we are living in a more volatile world, on so many different levels, both in terms of the weather and energy shocks, etc. That's how you mitigate these risks, is understanding it and setting out what your investment's going to look like in the future.
So the last question, ending on a hopefully a positive, but what gives you the most hope in terms of retrofits at present? What's exciting in the world of retrofits?
There are some really good examples of people that are really pushing the envelope in retrofitting their buildings, both in terms of some really great spaces, some really fascinating mixes of old and new technology and old and new materials, and making the most of the existing building, but including some really modern innovative aspects, but also kind of I've forgotten where I'm going with this. It's an inspiration from the retrofits I'm seeing, We included quite a few in the report, and we're always looking for more case studies, more solutions to kind of try to build inspiration and help others understand what is possible through retrofit, I think.
And I guess as the market grows, that brings more innovation, doesn't it? I mean, I think that's the exciting thing. There's more money day by day. There's more, demand, and therefore there are more companies coming in very different ways, and it drives that excitement, doesn't it?
I guess my hope is the positive spin looking forward is the amount of progress we've made in 5 years. I mean, and how it has increased year on year, more interest, it's gathering more momentum actually. So the look ahead is, in terms of uptake, is positive, and the engagement from the industry. I think that's the bit that sometimes when you look at the scale of the challenge and you do start to be slightly more pessimistic, it is to think back 5-10 years to how things were done and see the change that we've seen, and then couple that with the next generation of engineers we see coming through who are very conversant with this subject, really engaged with it, and actually holding decision makers and people to account, and actually voting with their feet. I know when we're doing recruitment, our commitments and what we're doing is actually key to the people we can recruit, and they will make decisions based on whether we're living up to what we've committed to. So I think the future generations coming through are actually going to is the positive as well, and sort of hold us to account for the decisions we're making today. I don't want to have to explain to my kids in 20 years' time why I didn't make the right decision.
Absolutely.
And going back to your point on innovation, there's so many innovators in this space, particularly around retrofit, looking at different software to help people understand the way the buildings operate and reduce energy consumption, but also helping portfolio owners look at their retrofit of the whole portfolios to understand the kind of the lowest cost, lowest carbon, lowest disruption pathway to retrofit everything. And in doing that, using different AI and machine learning tools so that it's incredibly quick, incredibly effective and dynamic, responding to kind of changes in policy or changes in costs, for example. So those kind of tools are really useful in kind of setting out the best way to kind of meet the challenge.
Brilliant.